I had no idea what was going on with me. My life really crashed. I really hit my rock bottom around the age of 26 as things just kept escalating. Yes, I was seeing all these different doctors trying to figure out what was going on with me and was getting accused of basically being crazy and a hypochondriac and hysterical and all these things because my symptoms were weird, right? And it was hard to get a clear sense of what was going on because I was like, oh, great, I have a name for it. Now what do I do? And she was like, take medication and do your best. Like she didn't really, she was, yeah, you're just going to have this the rest of your life. Like we'll probably be able to find some cocktail of medication. And it's not the answer. And somehow I really knew that. I was like, there's got to be more. So we've got to lower our toxic exposure. We've got to rebalance the gut microbiome and we've got to regulate the nervous system. I thought I ate a healthy diet like my whole adult life.
Jen, welcome. I understand that your sort of area of interest or expertise has to do with Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yep, I've dealt with it myself, and now I've been helping hundreds of different clients with it over the last 4 years or so.
I see. Okay, maybe just share your background with us if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I was originally a mental health therapist. My master's degree is actually in mental health. I was a trauma therapist. I worked with very complex trauma cases. I felt like I knew a lot about the nervous system and the brain, but I started getting symptoms that I didn't know what to do with, even though I had all this expertise. And a lot of it actually started nervous system and brain related in terms of like psychiatric symptoms. I think that a lot of people don't realize that mast cell activation can really target our neurons in our brain and our nervous system. But I also was getting a lot of allergic symptoms, and I'd had allergies since I was a little kid. Like I got jaundice when I was a baby. I had rashes all over my body when I was a baby. I had all sorts of food allergies growing up. And so allergies weren't something that was new to me. But when I was about 25, I started getting a lot more allergic symptoms in conjunction with all these increased nervous system dysregulation and psychiatric symptoms. And so I had no idea what was going on with me. My life really crashed. I really hit my rock bottom around the age of 26 as things just kept escalating. And I was like trying to start my career. I had graduated from grad school. I was working and I was trying to figure my life out. And things just got really bad for me really fast. So I ended up figuring out that what I was dealing with was Mast Cell Activation Syndrome. And this was back in 2016. People didn't know about it as much back then, but I was able to figure that out. And I had to go back and get a lot of new expertise in order to completely heal. So I used a lot of what I already knew about the nervous system and the brain, but I had to go back and study nutrition and the gut, micro and ancestral diets and all of these kinds of things to really give myself a full picture. That brought me to recovery. So now I'm also a nutritional therapy practitioner and a gut and psychology syndrome practitioner.
Interesting. All right. So let's maybe dig into a little bit about what mast cell activation syndrome is. Because first of all, can you talk about what a mast cell even is?
Yeah. Mast cells are like our little patrol system in our immune system. They go around our bodies and they look for invaders. So they're those sentinel cells that go around looking for toxins, looking for bacteria, looking for viruses, looking for anything that the immune system might see as a threat. That's actually part of what gets so confusing about this condition is that almost anything that the body perceives as a toxin could trigger it. So there can be many different root causes. But basically mast cells go around, they look for these invaders, and then when they find these invaders, they have an inflammatory response, which is also called degranulation. So you hear about mast cells degranulating, and basically they break apart and they release all these inflammatory chemicals. Histamine is just one of them. I think there's 6 different chemicals that they can release to create this inflammatory response. And histamine is one of those, and that's what causes classic allergic symptoms. So if you get a cold and your eyes are all itchy and your nose is all runny, your throat's sore, that's from mast cells releasing histamine in response to trying to fight off a virus, for example. Yeah,
and so mast cell activation can obviously range in severity to anything to like mild, like minimal, like stuffy nose and skin irritation, all the way up to anaphylactic, life-threatening conditions. And so this is something that maybe it's not the easiest thing to diagnose in many cases. There's a few tests out there. I think it's a tryptase test you can do. There's obviously the classic signs and symptoms, and if it gets better when you do things that are supposed to help with this. But how long did it take you to figure this out? You said you figured it out, but was that in conjunction with some sort of physician, or how did that work?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Shawn, is that diagnosis is so hard for so many people because these diagnostic criteria just started getting formalized in the last 15, 20 years, like very recent for the medical world, right? Because these are new conditions. People didn't used to get these kinds of things, or only very rarely. And so it really is to think of the diagnosis as a clinical diagnosis as opposed to it being reliant on test results. You mentioned tryptase. That's one of the inflammatory chemicals that mast cells can release. And so sometimes they will test for that in urine or blood. But again, depending on the person, you might be releasing tryptase, you might be releasing one of 5 other inflammatory chemicals because of your particular presentation of mast cells. So it's very hard to get accurate testing for it. Most doctors who specialize in this will diagnose more based on symptomology. And I was very lucky. Dr. Afrin is a leading mast cell doctor in the world. He's considered the world specialist in this condition. He's been working with it probably the longest. And I finally went to go see an allergist. I was seeing all these different doctors trying to figure out what was going on with me and was getting accused of basically being crazy and a hypochondriac and hysterical and all these things because my symptoms were weird, right? And it was hard to get a clear sense of what was going on. So I have sympathy for the doctors who are trying to figure me out because I was just saying all these bizarre different symptoms and trying to make connections and they didn't know what to do with me. But because a lot of my symptoms were allergic, right? So I was getting, after I was eating, my lips were swelling, I was having panic attacks, my heart was racing, I was getting hives all over my face and my neck. And so I did end up getting referred to an allergist for those symptoms. And she had just gone to a conference with Dr. Afrin. And she took one look at my whole presentation and was like, oh, I think maybe we have a case of Mast Cell Activation Syndrome going on. And I had never heard of this condition, but that was what was really helpful for me to put the puzzle pieces together because she was able to tell me, like, you know, your anxiety does not mean that you don't have a real condition going on. Like, an anxiety is a symptom of this condition. Ruminating thoughts is a symptom of this condition. A feeling of dread and impending doom, like, these are symptoms of this condition. So that was really helpful for me to put all the puzzle pieces together, that my allergic reaction symptoms, my nervous system symptoms, my psychiatric symptoms, they were actually all connected with the same underlying cause.
Okay, so now that you have this diagnosis, what is the treatment that's offered at that point? Now, there's antihistamines and mast cell stabilizing drugs, and there's a few things out there. So how did that go?
Yeah, that was pretty much it, because I was like, oh, great, I have a name for it. Now what do I do? And she was like, take medication and do your best. She was, yeah, you're just going to have this the rest of your life. We'll probably be able to find some cocktail of medications that'll keep you living a mostly functional life, but you're just going to have to avoid your major triggers and just basically be careful the rest of your life. And I was so miserable. I really couldn't function at that point. I was considering having to leave my job, move back in with my parents. I was very non-functional at that time. So I just couldn't accept that I was just going to have to basically take medications and deal. And even with the medications, when I first started on a mast cell stabilizer and an antihistamine program, I will admit my symptoms did improve for a short time. There was a couple months where I was like, oh, maybe I can just get by and just accept this and live my life like this. But within a few months, all the symptoms started creeping back, so my immune system was in such a state of dysregulation, even the medications really weren't helpful. And it's not the answer, right? And somehow I really knew that. I was like, there's got to be more.
Yeah, so you said major triggers. Did you have some things that were either food or environmental that were particularly problematic for you?
Yeah, so I did find some relief with a low histamine diet. It is such a boring diet, Shawn. Like, it is a rough diet. It's really hard to travel because you have to be really careful with like leftovers. You have to cook everything fresh. You have to go to the store like almost every day to make sure you have fresh. A lot of it is keeping food really fresh because the bacteria that grows on food tends to be a trigger. So I was getting some relief with that, but I didn't want to have to tiptoe around myself the rest of my life. And then anytime I smelled a scent, even just walking through a department store, walking by someone wearing cologne, like I was having trouble even going into buildings because there was usually something that would bother me. It was hard to even hang out with people because there was just any little thing that would start to set off my symptoms.
Okay, so you're on medications trying to avoid symptoms. You had a couple months of relief, and then it starts coming back. So
Yeah.
obviously, that's got to be disappointing and depressing and that type of stuff. So where did you go from there?
That's when I tried to open my mind a little bit and say, oh, because I had been I didn't know anything about alternative medicine. I didn't know anything about nutrition. So I had been in this mindset where if it was a condition that serious, I really could only be helped by doctors, right? Doctors are ones that deal with the most serious medical issues. But then when they couldn't help me, that opened my mind and it allowed me to really see that there might be another way. And so that's when I started going on alternative health blogs and Googling things like functional medicine approach to histamine issues and things like that. And it opened up a whole world for me that I didn't even know existed. And so then it was like, okay, I've got this whole other world of interventions that I can try that are actually looking at what is going on under the surface. Because I had been told by my doctor, because I had asked the question, like, why is this happening now? What is what is going on in my body? This is happening. And the answer was like, oh, our immune systems just do this sometimes. We don't know why. Mm-hmm. Which is so ridiculous. I mean, we have so much research on the underlying mechanisms of this stuff. It just doesn't tend to reach the people in the medical field, unfortunately. But I was so excited to see that there was a world of people who were asking the question why. And that's when I started digging into that.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, this is a relatively new condition that wasn't really described before. And the question is, maybe we're better at diagnosing, maybe we're noticing more, or maybe it's actually increasing in incidence. Do you have any idea how many people this affects worldwide or in this country? Is there any data on that?
There's several different estimates. The highest one I've seen is potentially up to 17% of people. And like you said, these conditions are on a spectrum. So that doesn't mean that everyone in that 17% has full-blown mast cell activation syndrome in its most debilitating form. But I think a lot more people are dealing with this condition somewhere along that spectrum than realize it. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I see this with many conditions. It's frustrating because you'll have some sort of maybe strange condition. Maybe you get a diagnosis and you ask, why did that occur? And almost always the answer is, we just don't know. Maybe it's genetics or bad luck. And so when you don't know what's causing it, it's really hard to fix it, because then you're just like, well, again, we're just going to mask the symptoms with medications. And that's, for actually quite most of our chronic diseases, that's how we treat it, unfortunately. So so again, you start digging into some of the data on histamine issues. And again, you mentioned that's one component of this, not the only thing. But so where did that lead you to go?
I started learning what people were hypothesizing as the root causes. And I think you're right, Shawn. I think that we do have more awareness of it. So that's part of why more people are getting diagnosed. But I think objectively, we also are seeing massive increase in the numbers. And I think some of these root causes are increased exposure to toxins and intergenerational exposure to toxins, such as heavy metals, pesticides, mycotoxins, all kinds of things, in addition to an increased decline in our microbiome health, and therefore our immune health over time, right? Because the gut microbiome is so intimately connected to our immune system function. The more imbalance you have in the bacterial and other microbial populations, the more imbalance you're going to have in your immune function. And this is really a very severely imbalanced immune function is what's going on with these conditions. And so I started digging into some of those root causes in terms of, okay, if we know that exposure to toxins increases the rate of mast cell degranulation, if we know that an imbalanced microbiome dysregulates our immune function, if we know that a dysregulated nervous system decreases the function of our immune system and our detoxification pathways, then those must be the three roads to really resolving the root causes. So we've got to lower our toxic exposure, we've got to rebalance the gut microbiome, and we've got to regulate the nervous system. And so I really took those three parallel paths simultaneously, and I completely overhauled my life. I refer to it as my year of rebuilding myself, where I really let go of everything that I thought I knew about myself and how I was living with my life. And I just, moment by moment, day by day, was like, how can I optimize how I'm living to promote recovery in these three areas?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's really difficult to live without exposing yourself to something that would potentially trigger you. I guess you could go be a hermit, live up on the top of some mountain somewhere, and maybe you get some relief. It's really not an option for most people. You're going to expose, if you just like never go inside a building again the rest of your life, and you're going to be exposed to scents and smells, and you got to eat, obviously. And so where did you start? And I guess maybe walk me through the process, because you said we've got these three maybe primary drivers of this condition: neurological, immune, gut microbiome, so on and so forth. Where did you start with this? What helps sequentially? Like, what did you, this is the first thing I did. This helped me X amount. And how did that go?
Yeah, first of all, I had to completely rethink what I thought a healthy diet was. Because I thought I ate a healthy diet like my whole adult life, because I was eating whole grains and lean meat, and I was cooking everything in olive oil, and I ate vegetables and salads every day. So I was like, oh, I eat healthy. Like, I definitely don't need any help there. But I also would eat takeout pretty regularly. When I would eat ice cream and other desserts at night, I was like, oh, everything in moderation. I ate a very balanced, healthy diet, right? And I realized that diet I'd been eating had actually been setting me up for illness. Now, I had also had quite a few rounds of antibiotics in the few years leading up to me getting sick, which I think was like the final straw for me. But obviously, everything has to happen in context. Not everyone who takes antibiotics gets mast cell activation syndrome. So I realized that my diet had really been setting me up for nutrient depletions, despite eating what I thought was a healthy diet, and a lot of microbiome imbalance. And so I started basically cutting one thing out at a time, because I had learned about the GAPS diet, which is a method of rebalancing the gut microbiome and sealing leaky gut. And it is primarily animal-based. It really focuses on heavy intake of animal protein and fat in the form of soups. And I had to basically cut one food group out at a time until I could get to that, because I was in such a state of severe gut dysbiosis that every time I cut out a food, I would go into a really severe Herxheimer or die-off reaction, where I would have a lot of overgrown bacteria and parasites die inside of me, and it would make me very sick for a period of time. So I had to do this very slowly. It actually took me almost a year to fully get to the point where I was doing what's called the GAPS intro diet.
Okay, so changing the diet had an effect. And so what percentage, how much did that resolve your issues?
I think it was probably 50% of it. And I really see that. I really try to emphasize the gut-brain axis as a foundation for how to think about these issues. The fact that our brain and our gut, our nervous system, our immune system are very much intertwined. And so the gut microbiome is easily half of the picture. I also did a lot of nervous system regulation work. I really worked on shifting my mindset and doing a lot of meditation and trauma releasing practices. That was really helpful for me too. And I don't think the diet would have worked as well if I hadn't had, I was able to get to a place where I didn't view the diet as a punishment. I think a lot of people come to restrictive diets that way, because objectively a meat-based diet, it is fairly restrictive in the sense that you are cutting out a lot of foods that are often seen as like normal things to eat. But I saw it as an opportunity and actually a gift in order to allow me to really transform myself and become a new person. And I think because I did all that mindset work, it actually helped the diet work better. But yeah, easily 50%, I think, was related to this massive shift in my gut microbiome that I was able to facilitate through that intervention.
So today you're completely symptom-free? Or are you like, is it in the past, you don't have to deal with it anymore? And how are you at this point?
Yeah, day to day, I don't have any symptoms anymore. Like it used to be, I woke up in the morning and my face was all swollen and I had hives all down my neck and my chest was all red, and had to be very careful what I did through the day. It was very limited, was functionally housebound a lot of the time. Today, yeah, I really can do anything and clear skin, don't have symptoms anymore. I think I will always be careful the rest of my life, because to have been that ill, there's always the chance that your body could have a big response to a stressor in life and go back into that pattern. And so I don't ever like to be cavalier about my recovery. I like to really respect that my body told me, you were overwhelmed for a very long time. We really needed you to give us extra support for a really long time. And so I maintain a very healthy ancestral diet and lifestyle, but it's much more flexible now than it was before. And yeah, I'm symptom free day to day. Don't have to worry about the same triggers at all.
Well, that's very nice to see with that. So you made your recovery now. At what point did you decide to say, hey, this is something that I want to share with the world and try to help these other people with that? How did that evolve?
Yeah, I knew it even from the time I started recovering, because I knew I had to approach my journey with the complete faith that it was going to work. That's where mindset comes in too, right? Like, you have to do this, the diet's essential, but you have to do it with the right approach and the right mindset. So I had complete faith from the beginning that it was going to work. And so I really promised myself, okay, once I recover and once I really fine tune how my recovery process is going to be optimal, I'm going to share this with other people. And I really got to that point in about 2019. It took me about 2 full years of really working on the nutrition, really working on the nervous system regulation to get there. And lo and behold, 2020 and the pandemic hit right afterwards. And since then, this condition, the rate of developing this condition has increased even more, unfortunately. And so it was perfect divine timing in a way to really start promoting my message that, hey, you can recover from this. Because still today, if you're even lucky enough to get a diagnosis or even figure out what's going on, you're still told you just have to take medications the rest of your life. You just have to manage this the rest of your life. And I'm just living proof that's not true.
You'd mentioned it's the incidence of this condition, Mast Cell Activation Syndrome, has increased certainly over the last couple of decades and more recently at a more rapid rate, supposedly. Why do you think that is? What do you think's going on that we're seeing more people with this condition that 20 years ago no one knew, no one even had heard of?
Yeah.
Why are we seeing it today? What do you think's going on?
I really think we are seeing the accumulation of multiple generations of toxic exposure and microbiome damages. We've always been exposed to some amount of toxins in our environment. Even in ancient Rome, they were exposed to lead a lot, right? It's not that this is new, but there's just, since the Industrial Revolution, there's been so many new toxins pumped into our environment, and especially post-World War II, where now we have all these pesticides and fertilizers that never were used before that time. And for the younger generations, we're 3, 4, even 5 generations past World War II now, and those toxins, if you're not able to release them through your lifetime, you pass them down through the placenta, through your breast milk, through families. And so I think we just have this massive accumulation of toxicity we're dealing with now, and all the microplastics that are proliferated now. That's no exception. It's just adding more to the pile, really, in our younger generation. And we have documented heavy metals, pesticides, microplastics. These can all trigger mast cells. That's been documented now. And on top of that, gosh, the processed food industry, again, we're multiple generations into that now, into this hyper-sterilized lifestyle that we're all living. And that degrades our microbiome. We have a whole bacterial ecosystem living on every inch of our body, and so many things that we do through the day, whether it's showering in chlorinated water or wiping everything down with antiseptics or taking antibiotics anytime we get even a little sore throat or whatever it is, we're just degrading that microbiome so severely that we're seeing children develop autoimmune diseases within a few years of being born now. That never used to happen. And so I think Mast Cell Activation Syndrome is just a part of this bigger picture we're dealing with. And unfortunately, with the pandemic, some people did get mast cell. A lot of people have gotten mast cell activation triggered from COVID. And I think that it really shows that most of us had already very imbalanced immune systems. And that was like the final cherry on top for a lot of people. Plus, now people are hyper sterilizing their environments more and more. They're not touching each other and interacting as much to help support their immune system. So I think you just see like all these different factors coming together for this perfect storm. And I see mast cell activation syndrome as your immune system on its last legs of being completely overwhelmed with the environment that it's been given.
I'm not surprised. That probably contributes to significantly. Obviously, we've radically changed our environment, and we do have this panic. We saw the last couple of years with a pandemic where people were sterilizing their groceries and some of that stuff. And you wonder if it has a backlash on that. So your diet today looks like, what does your diet these days look like?
Yeah, meat is still the foundation of my diet, which is so different to how it was before this, where I thought the foundation of the diet should be whole grains and veggies, and then meat was like a little garnish. Now it's really flipped. Meat is the basis of my diet. Red meat especially, I just really thrive on a really heavy red meat, fat-based diet. But I'm a lot more flexible now. At one point, I was mostly meat-based for a long period of time. Now I can eat a variety of vegetables, a variety of fruits, even some nuts and seeds, things like coconut. I can even eat grains now without any backlash. What's amazing, Shawn, though, is how your preferences change. There's a lot of things I can eat now. I don't have any reaction to them, but it's rice. I'm like, like why? So I really do still keep meat as the foundation of my diet, but it is nice to have that ability to be flexible.
Yeah, it's like meat is the nutrition, and these other things are like condiments or flavoring enhancements, perhaps.
Yeah, extra micronutrients, but not the foundation. Yeah.
So when you get someone that comes to you with mast cell activation syndrome, and they've been to the primary care physician, they get shoveled off to the immunologist or the allergist, and they're on their cocktail of drugs, which may or may not be working. How do you approach that? What do you do?
Yeah, I've explained to them a bit of what I've explained to you in terms of, look, your doctor is trying to band-aid your symptoms. They're trying to suppress your symptoms because they want you to feel better. It's not malicious. It's like they do want you to feel better, and the tools they have are medications. But that doesn't address the root cause of why you're getting sick. Your symptoms are messages from your body. Your immune system talks to you through symptoms, right? Your immune system, unfortunately, can't speak to you. It needs to share what's going on through your symptoms. And so if we are able to listen to your symptoms as indications of what your body is asking for, now we have a road forward. And so I always start with people with diet, right? And a lot of people are on low histamine diets that include a lot of starchy foods, right? So like classic low histamine diet has a lot of oatmeal, rice, potatoes, like as the foundation. And that's certainly better than processed food. So that's often an improvement for what people were doing before. But those complex carbohydrates just tend to really irritate the gut lining and feed the bacterial overgrowth. So even if people are tolerating them, it doesn't necessarily promote their healing. So I really try to move them towards more of a GAPS diet or specific carbohydrate diet that is a lot more meat-based. And I don't necessarily do it unless it's necessary, but there are a lot of people that I take fully carnivore because sometimes people will come to me and they're like, I can tolerate oatmeal, carrots, and a little bit of beef. And it's okay, let's just eat beef for a while because they're like they think vegetables are healthy, so they're desperately trying to find a vegetable that is going to work for them, but they keep reacting. There's a lot of these compounds, right, what are often called like anti-nutrients or different antioxidants, right, compounds in vegetables that for a healthy person might be fine, but for people who are highly sensitive often are just triggers of symptoms. And often a very simple diet is most healing early on. I usually take people to a GAPS diet that is mostly meat and some vegetables if they can tolerate them, or a carnivore diet for a period of time until we get that gut microbiome rebalance. And I find if we really do that correctly and we really focus on the gut healing properties of animal foods, people are able to expand their diet long term without their symptoms coming back.
How long do you think that process takes in your experience?
1 to 2 years for most people. I do see some people recover faster, like in 6 months, and I see some people that take longer, more like 3 or 4 years, but I would say most people is 1 to 2 years.
Okay. And obviously a lot of people that will be watching this have been on low carb, keto, carnivore diets. That's generally who my audience is. And some of the folks are dealing with either some sort of histamine issue or, as you
Yeah.
mentioned, mast cell activation syndrome. So what are the other things? Because you'd mentioned there are other things besides, and I'm fully of the opinion that the diet is an essential part, but it may not be the only
Yeah.
part. And I think that's where other lifestyle and things may come into play. So where do you, so you
Yeah.
start with the diet. What are the other things you roll into that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is also why some people do get stuck on carnivore diets. And I want to say if you're thriving on a carnivore or low carb keto diet and you don't want to add in more foods, you don't have to. You'll be fine. You can safely do these diets long term and it's no issue. But if people are wanting or craving to add in more things and they feel like they're unable to, it's usually because they have missed a couple of things. One is dealing with underlying toxicity, like I've mentioned. You can heal your gut and eat all these gut healing foods all you want, but if you have a lot of heavy metals or pesticides or mycotoxins that are stuck in the digestive tract or stuck circulating in your lymphatic system, stuck circulating in your bile system, I have seen sometimes diet alone not be enough. And so I promote really gentle detoxification strategies. You have to go really slow if you're a very highly sensitive person, but we often use things like sauna or enemas or castor oil or detox baths, some binders. Sometimes we will use some like antimicrobial herbs when necessary. If someone's got a really gnarly parasitic overgrowth or something like that, sometimes diet alone isn't enough for that. We do really focus on detox strategies. Again, just very paced and gentle when you're highly sensitive. And then the nervous system piece is the other piece, right? And so again, I see a lot of people who, for good reason, are in a state of total fear and dysregulation in relation to their symptoms. This is a really scary condition. I mentioned that a lot of the symptoms can be neuropsychiatric, so people get a lot of phobias and fear and anxiety and panic and dread along with this. And very often it will manifest in people who already have a history of trauma or a highly stressful lifestyle. I see it manifests a lot in people who are highly perfectionists or were highly criticized growing up. These nervous system patterns are really significant. And so if you're going to get anywhere with the physical interventions like the diet and detox, you've got to approach it with the right mindset. And that's where a lot of the brain retraining, nervous system regulation practices, and trauma release practices are essential.
Okay, interesting stuff. And how many people have you run into with this now over the year? You obviously, I'm not sure when you started trying to help people, but how many people have you dealt with?
Yeah, I started doing health coaching with people in 2020. And so it's been 4 years. And yeah, it's been hundreds of people now that have gone through my practice. It may even be reaching the thousands pretty soon here. So I have a pretty big social media presence, and I have a program called Immune Resilience that I run. There's not many programs out there specifically targeted for this condition or these kinds of presentations of symptoms. And so mine is one of the ones out there. And yeah, we really try to emphasize that you've got to do all these things simultaneously. A lot of people either just do the diet or just do brain retraining. And sometimes you do recover just by doing one or the other. There definitely are those stories out there, but we often see people who are the most compromised and most complex. You really need to address all of these issues at the same time.
Yeah, and so obviously the nervous system part, what's the basis of that sort of piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea here is that if your body is in a state of survival, right? If your body is in a state of stuck trauma, right, where it is afraid that there is an imminent threat to your survival, your body is not going to prioritize healing tissue in terms of gut healing. It's not going to prioritize keeping your detox pathways open in terms of all your liver pathways and everything else. And they've even done studies on contrasting your level of cortisol to how fast like a cut heals on your body, and like cuts heal slower when your cortisol is elevated or dysregulated. It is really simple science, but sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their head around that, like their attitude and their mindset and how they're going about their day-to-day life and attitude actually will affect how well you heal. So we use a few different techniques. If people are feeling like they've got a lot of stuck emotions, like they just feel like they are sad, anxious, scared, angry all the time, and for good reason. People with this condition have really suffered and usually have felt very betrayed by the medical field. Maybe medical interventions have actually made them worse sometimes, right? A lot of people come to us after having their symptoms triggered by a medication or a surgery or some other procedure. But that's a lot of emotions that people often have built up in their body that they're not able to let go. So we use EFT tapping as a way to help move emotions through the body, because a lot of people are stuck in this chronic state of feeling scared or angry or sad, but they don't really know how to really feel the emotion. They're like holding on to it and not fully allowing it to move through them. And this is what keeps us in that chronic stress and survival state. So we do use some of those techniques to help move the emotions through the body. We also use a technique called neuromeditation, which basically teaches some very core skills that are prerequisites for doing a successful meditation practice. Meditation, I mean, it's been used for thousands of years, right? It's one of the most effective ways to retrain the brain. But a lot of people in the modern world don't have the foundational skills to actually be successful with their practice. And then they try to meditate and they're like, well, that didn't work, or that was terrible, or that made me feel worse, right? And then they give it up. So we really teach foundational skills such as mindfulness, focus, and open heart, which are prerequisites to be able to have a successful meditation practice. And then lastly, I also teach a technique called trauma release exercises. And this is a method of actually stimulating a tremoring or shaking sensation in the body. I'm actually going to be teaching it at Meatstock in May. I'm really excited. I just got invited to do that. But basically, it's a way of processing trauma where you don't have to talk about your trauma. You don't have to delve into traumatic memory. You really just have to allow your nervous system to let go of the actual physical tension patterns that were formed through the experience. Because anytime we experience something traumatic or stressful, we tense, and we feel that, right? We tense up our shoulders when we've had a hard day, we get contracted inward. And for the bigger traumas in our life, that's true too, but those patterns tend to stay stuck. And this method actually stimulates the body to vibrate or shake so that those patterns can start to unwind. And it's incredibly effective in helping the nervous system come down out of a chronic stress response.
Interesting. Yeah. I guess I'll see you at the Meatstock events. I'll be there.
Yeah.
I think it's next May, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So I'll get to meet you in person and so on. So that'll be fun. So as far as you'd mentioned, I think his name was Dr. Afra. I believe that's what Afra or something along those lines.
Yeah. Afrin. Yeah.
Afrin. Like there used to be like a nasal spray called Afrin, I think. So does he practice a lot of the things that you've done, or are you expanding upon some of one of the things he looks at?
No, I actually, and no hate on Dr. Afrin. He's a pioneer in the medical field. Like, he's the biggest advocate for this condition in the conventional medical field. So he's doing important work. But I actually get a lot of people who come to me after meeting with him because he's very much on the medication train in terms of just suppressing symptoms. So yeah, he's not doing the kind of interventions that I am, unfortunately. I don't think he's really getting to the root cause for a lot of folks. Okay. And so the medications that are used in almost, I hate to call it, but that is a Band-Aid effect, basically. Yeah, totally.
How much, I guess if we look at outcomes, can we look at their outcomes and say, hey, this is maybe the world's leading authority on mast cell activation syndrome in I assume the allopathic world versus what you're doing, which would be seen maybe as, I don't know, maybe more functional. What are the differences in outcomes as far as your experience?
I know. I wish someone could actually do a formal study on it if anyone wants to fund that. But yeah, I don't know. Most people who come to my program have tried that route and realized, oh, this is just a Band-Aid. I'm just really getting worse. And so then they come to do an approach like mine instead. So yeah, I'm always going to have the bias that you need to listen to your body. It's not just malfunctioning, it's telling you something is wrong and needs to be supported. And what I'm doing is actually trying to support the body in the way that it's asking to be supported, as opposed to just, oh, that symptom is annoying, I'm just going to suppress it, which is often what we've been taught to do our whole lives, right? Like, you have a stomach ache, take an antacid medication. You have a headache, take an aspirin, without asking, like, why do you have a stomach ache? Why do you have a headache? And I don't think mast cell activation syndrome is any different. I don't think it's anything malfunctioning. I think it's your immune system in an extreme state of dysregulation after being exposed to extreme stressors repeatedly.
Yeah, that's, you see a lot of people, it's medication. And I think, fortunately, I think many more people are starting to get it. And we have this, maybe we'll see some effort into putting into, obviously, mast cell activation syndrome is not the greatest healthcare crisis that we have in the United States. You look at things like diabetes and obesity would obviously,
Sure,
by orders of magnitude, over see that. But we're seeing some people talking about this. Maybe we've got Make America Healthy Again as something. Maybe we'll get maybe we will get some funding into research on some of this stuff, because I lament the fact that I struggle to get research on just a diet that I think could impact things like diabetes, but certainly
I know,
so on and so forth. Let me ask you, you'd mentioned you have a social media presence. So let's talk about that. Where are you located on that, and how do people find what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm Whole Body Healing with Jen. Jen is Jen, and I'm on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. So I post pretty regularly on all those platforms. And yeah, I really love spreading awareness and education. With mast cell activation syndrome, people tend to have all these really vague, weird, hard to explain, but debilitating symptoms. And so I get comments all the time on my videos like, oh, like, you just explained my life. I've never been able to put the pieces together like that. So yeah, it's really important to me to spread awareness.
Okay. And so let me ask you about with the social media. You're not like where I am, where I'm promoting just people eating a lot of meat. You probably have a whole sort of a different program, so you may not get the negative pushback. But as far as the approach you're using, how much does it, I assume with Dr. Afrin, you've got to be seen, evaluated, tested, you put on a medication. How much of that do you have to do?
I don't have to do any of it because I'm not a doctor. So it is a blessing and a curse, right? Because in some ways I have less formal credibility, but in other ways it's a blessing because I don't have to jump through the hoops of billing insurance and giving people formal diagnosis and all that stuff that is really not necessary for most people to recover. So when people come to work with us, we do some functional testing, like we do some urine, blood, hair testing just to get a picture of what's going on. But honestly, most of what's going on for people, we can really assess through symptoms. Like I said, I really see the symptoms as the language of the body. And so if we can do a thorough assessment of symptoms, we can actually tell a lot of what's going on and what is probably needed. But yeah, I definitely do get pushback. There are a lot of people who really think that these kinds of conditions are just genetic destiny, right? That it's like some people are just genetically unlucky and just have these conditions and there's nothing you can do about it. And so I definitely do get some of that pushback, unfortunately.
Given what you went through, let me just, and I don't know if you've given much consideration to this, I suspect you might have, you in the past, you had a sort of approach, dealing with, I think you said trauma and the nervous system, and then you went through what you went through. Does your current experience and the way you've solved the issue for yourself impact how you would have thought? Would it have changed how you practice your previous sort of situation with the nervous system? Has this changed that?
Oh my gosh, so much. So much. That's why I couldn't go back to the mental health field. So I was working in community mental health. I then was in private practice for a while. And I actually let go of I was a licensed professional counselor for many years, and I actually recently finally let go of my license because I just don't believe in what the status quo of the mental health field is doing anymore, because I can't untangle the nutritional deficiencies, the metabolic imbalance, the microbiome imbalance. All of that is so tied up in our neuropsychiatric health. And that was actually the most shocking thing that happened to me, because I had dealt with mental health symptoms my whole life. Like I'd always been an anxious kid. I had struggled with addictive tendencies, very obsessive compulsive type behaviors and rumination thinking my whole life. And, the mental health approach definitely helped cope, and the nervous system regulation practices definitely helped. I don't want to negate that, but I found almost complete remission from my mental health symptoms through the nutritional interventions. And if we think about it, like 70% of our nervous system is entangled in our gut lining, right? And it's getting direct chemical signals from our microbiome that's shooting messages up to the brain, telling it how to think, how to perceive, how to feel. So yeah, our mental emotional health is our gut health, is our nervous system health. Like it's all intertwined. And I actually have been trying to start another program called Brain Nourishment. We've just had a couple cohorts so far, but mental health is a passion of mine, of course. It's what my master's degree is in. It's what I did for a long time. And I just don't see mental health care being able to be divorced from nutrition at all anymore.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to see when you look back at what you're trained upon and what your experience leads you to, and you question some of the value of the training, or obviously some of it's very helpful, but then you have to say the underlying thesis may have been skewed by this. Anyway, Jen, I thank you for doing this. Appreciate the discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Again, remind me the social media handles as we close.
Yes, Whole Body Healing with JEN on all platforms. And I also have a website, wholebodyhealingwithjen.com, and all my programs and information is up there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jen. Appreciate it.